platform consultant and trainer. So I do data visualizations training, Power BI training. And I'm also an MVP. I'm really honored and so thankful to be part of this really amazing group. And I run London Power BI user group. So if you're ever in London, fancy free beer and free pizza, do check us out. And also if you want to learn Power BI and Power Platform. So yeah, just Google and you'll find us. But the amazing thing I'm really, really proud of is I'm a professional selfie taker. And also I do a bit of painting. So why I talk about this is because I do take my pictures very seriously, and I do take my painting very seriously. Maybe that's why I'm interested in data visualizations as well. So that's why and also this is like an icebreaker for the sessions. It brings a bit of giggle, whoever's sleeping, that wakes them up. And so that's that. And a few other things, please silence your cell phones. I don't care, but yeah. And explore other things SQL Pass offers. So there are plenty of things that SQL Pass offers. Go and check them out. And please, please, please do session evaluations. So that's something always helps us, what we did well and what we didn't do well. So it's always nice to hear. This is where I skipped when I was talking about the learning path. So today, I am doing the introduction to data visualization and the best practices. Tomorrow, James talking about design strategies. James, do you want to wave your hand? Yeah. And on the third day, we both are presenting about what is a name and and all the cool things about that. So in today's session, what we're going to talk about is I'm going to talk about data visualizations and why data visualizations are important. And also, we will be looking at the science behind the data visualizations, the human perspective, how we look at the data visualizations. And we also look at, because of the perspective, how we can be fooled by the data visualizations, how our brain fools us when we're looking at the data visualization. We will be looking at Gestalt's principles and how we can learn a lot from Gestalt principles and how we can use them for the better data visualizations, the effective data visualizations. And then we will be looking at various types of data and how to choose the right visual. And we're going to end it on the color theory. So some of the things you see today, we probably will touch them again tomorrow and day after tomorrow briefly. But it's a session, it's learning path covers a whole lots of things. Just before I dwell into the session, just want to understand, how many of you use Power BI here? Pretty much, okay. How many of you use other products? Okay, good. Well, this session is not only Power BI, but having said that, most of the examples I would be showing will be Power BI oriented. And when we come to the color theory, I will be talking about Power BI themes. I will not be talking about any other tools. So, but all the rest of the content today and the rest of the sessions, they can be used for any other data visualizations tools as well. Just want to let you know. All right, so I always start my session with this quote, and not all the sessions, my training, when I do my data visualizations training, I start my training with this quote. And this is a quote by Don Norman. Does anyone know Don Norman? Well, have you heard of Don Norman? So if you are interested in data visualization or UX, UI design, I would totally, totally, totally recommend Don Norman's books. One of the really example is how many of you struggle with the push and pull of a door? And so it's because it's a wrong design. So in everyday design, we see so many things. So that's what he talks about, and it's a great book when you're talking about the data visualization. So why this code for today's session and this learning path is at the end of this learning path, you may not create amazing visualizations, amazing dashboards, but at least you won't create bad ones. So that's the aim of the session. We are not here to just transform everything in 3 days. So on that note, so what it is in today's world, well, everyone say knowledge is power. But in today's world, we are in a place where data is power. But how we can make this data powerful? We can make data powerful with a better communication. And data visualization is something helps you to do that. How many of you seen this? Anyone saw this thing? Yeah? Yes? Okay. So this is actually from the Weather Channel. And they did a data visualization. It's like a live view of showing what happens if you're there in the storm and don't listen to the news. So this is a really depressing data. But by using the data visualization, it's not only data visualization, it's the communication. But if you use the better communication, and if you actually use the right tools to communicate, once you see this one, you would never forget. That is the communication. You want to communicate whatever the data you have, you want to communicate in a way that your user doesn't forget. So that's why data visualization that's what data visualization does. Whatever the data, whatever the size of the data, how complex it is, how depressing it is, you want your users to remember it. So we are in the ocean of data. So if you see, how many of you read Gartner Quadrant and Gartner stuff? So one of the Gartner analyst, Dow Laney, I'm not very good at pronouncing, but what he said is we are overwhelmed with data. The data is coming from various ways, from the volume, velocity, and variety. And we are in a world full of data, full of complex data. If you look back, the very first time I got my computer, the entire computer hard disk was 20 GB. And my first computer was Windows XP. I was born in India. That was I had the far best computer compared to any one of my friends. And that was the best configured computer. Now this laptop has a 32 GB RAM, forget about the hard disk. So that's how we are. The disks are cheaper, data is coming from all different ways, and we are surrounded by complex data. And we need better communication to do that complex data. And this, even though if there is not a complex data, but data visualization is not new. We have been using data visualization way from the history. Anyone saw this before? Yeah? So this is a way long ago. It's from the 1812. What is this is talking about is the Napoleon army. So this is probably one of the most amazing visualizations from the past. Is what it is showing in this visualization is how the army started. So the one in the top, it's showing the army, how big the army was, and over the time. And in the bottom, you can see the temperatures and how much food they had and all those things. So basically, they started quite a lot of members, and then all the way they went. But you can see how when the temperatures dropped really low, the army, many people obviously died with the weather conditions and also for the fighting. And when you see how they came, by the time they came back, how small it is, and how some army troops joined and left. So this is visualizations from data 1812. So data visualization is not new. But why it is more important to us now is because of the complexity and the type of data we are receiving. So when we go to a client side, when you go to business users, our business users are expecting questions to be answered quickly. Nowadays, before there used to be change log and the reports gets created, you do the source control and all those things. Now it's not the same case. What the user wants is a Q&A visual. And I just want to type something on my dashboard, I want to get the answers. That's how the users want. So data visualization is a lot more important than previously. And also because we have a lot of data from various sources and the size, the analysts and the report designers are expected to solve these problems pretty quickly. They want you to have tools which can analyze, process, and deliver reports pretty quickly. So Power BI is a great tool for that, because Power BI gives us, you can analyze the data from various data sources, process it pretty quickly, and publish it. So Power BI is a great tool for that. And also to recognize the patterns when you have like a massive data, large amounts of data, your users are expecting to see your data visualization, try to find the patterns, and try to be able to answer questions quickly. So I'm a consultant, so I work with various clients. And once I went to Home Office for the UK, and they showed us some data. And it was very interesting. It's like, I don't know if anyone saw it, like very recently, a very really upsetting thing happened in the UK. It's like 39 people died behind of the lorry. So this episode was way before. But what they were showing us was the graph database and how they were managed to find like when who is flying with whom and how there is a pattern. Over the time, how they could see, like this person is flying from this place to other place, but at the same time, there is another person also flying in the same flight, but not related. But this person is related somewhere else. And at the end, by using a graph database, they could be able to find a pattern who are doing some human trafficking. And that example, I don't know that was a real example or test data, but when they demoed it, on so many flights, how many flights go from Heathrow every day? On top of that flights, just in one visual, they could see the pattern. And that's how powerful visuals and the patterns are, because you can see data, and that's what the users are expecting from us. And that's why data visualization is a lot more important to us now than before. So this is why I was trying to say is like data visualization is important because it's completely changing the way we work. It's helping us to answer the questions faster, and also the issues before they become problems, and to convey the message across quickly. So this is why data visualization is important, and you're in a really amazing session because you chose the right one. And when it comes to the data visualization, many times that people forget is or maybe try not to accept, is data visualization is a science and art. So today, first we will see the science bits of the data visualization, and we will talk about art side as well. So the science behind the data visualizations to create this really good data visualizations. How many of you know or read the book called Thinking Fast and Slow? No, I read. It's a great book. But what we can learn from that one is like in this book, what they talk about is system 1 and system 2, how system 1 performs and how system 2 performs. So from this one, what can you see? Someone yelling, yes. And who's going to give me the answer for the next one? So that's it. So the thing is, math is hard. Visuals are easy. So when you're creating something, you want your user to see something fast. And that's what data visualization does for you. Is it gives you that way. It's like, okay, these are the fast results. Because that's how our brain works. That's the cognitive science is because 70% of our brain, a human brain, is dedicated to visual processing. We basically consume visuals really quickly. So that's why data visualizations is also really good, is because we consume them really quickly. But having said that, before we talk about how to do this, because we can consume things really quickly, sometimes these visuals can totally fool us. So before we see how we do the other things, let's see how visuals can lie. I have a few examples, and I want you to keep the momentum going. So can you see this visual? And can you tell me if you can see anything wrong? But there is definitely things wrong. Yeah, you can see that URL where I got that one, that explains. So can anyone point out a few mistakes? Well, one mistake in that? Exactly. And not also the percentages don't add up. The small portion is 56%. Well, you know which one is the 56%? And because I said there is something wrong, even then we managed to find only one. Even after we knew there is something wrong. And this is a very easy, very quick way how visuals can fool us. So always show the right data. And okay, there is another one over here. Can anyone see? Well, I'm just going to show anyway. So, when in the Power BI, because we have conditional formatting and we have data bars, and we always, I'm sure every Power BI designer at least once use the data bars. But many times is trying to use the data, right? Here there are a few things, colors doesn't make sense. There is a lot of data. There's a lot of content on that visual. And size of the data bar, so the top data bar and the bottom data bar, if you look at the numbers and the size is so different. So these are the mistakes we could quite quickly make. And the one last one. So can you see anything here? Well, yeah, there is font size, yes. But from the numbers point of view, if you look at the first bar and the next bar, what you see is there is the difference. The difference you see is so different. So for example, I have another one, but this is not a great example because I don't have the values. But here, you actually see a different difference compared to the previous one. What happened there was the axis. Here, axis actually starts at 0. But in the previous one, let me go back if I can. If you go back here, let me see. The axis starts at 250. And in here, the axis starts at 0. And this is a mistake we always make. Because Power BI is kind of makes you not to do it, but we are not only talking about Power BI, when we create visuals, these are something it fools us, our brain fools us, and we always think visuals are right. So why our brain fools us and how we should create our visualizations is because if we understand how the patterns work. So that's why I wanted to talk about Gestalt's principles, is because Gestalt's principles helps us to create the effective data visualization. So for all the visuals you saw, the visuals which fooled us, they are amazing visuals. They look nice, they look neat, there is color, and it has content, but it fooled us. Why? Because we look at data in a perspective. What we do is we basically want to group stuff, and our human brains, we always want to group things. That's how it works. So let's look at Gestalt's principles, and that it kind of makes sense what I'm talking about. How many of you heard Gestalt principles, if I said it right? Oops. Yeah? Again, that's another thing I would totally recommend if you're into data visualization, go and look around the Gestalt's principles. So what's the Gestalt's principle is all about is, what can you see here? Come on. A triangle. Well, let me have one more. What can you see here? A dog. So people can recognize objects even when they're missing. That's what it is about the Gestalt. So Gestalt means it's a whole, a unified whole. What we look at is, even though some stuff are missing, we try to make them as a group. So these things works for the data visualizations as well. So what you're doing is you look at that, even though not all the elements are there, you're looking for the patterns. And you look at the patterns, and in your memory, you make, okay, this looks like a dog. And you just think it's a dog. So that's the psychology. That's the psychology of the visual perception. And that psychology works completely towards the data visualizations as well. So there are many Gestalt's principles, but here what we're going to look at these Gestalt's principles and see how that's going to help us with the data visualization. So to understand it better, we will start with these dots. So what I have here, I have gray dots. So in the beginning, what you have is gray dots. Now what do you see? Gray and red. So we automatically made a group. You don't actually count how many dots are there, how many things are there. What you do is you just made two groups. It's called similarity. You see similar things, one similar thing and the other similar thing, and you make a group out of it. And that's how it works. So for example, if you take this visual, I'm sure everyone created a visual like this. Even when I go to a client, they always want a wide table with lots of data and a matrix. I'm pretty sure everyone created. We all hate it, but that's what client wants. So when you look at this, what it is UK fuel prices over the time. And I am showing diesel and petrol. Until I show you diesel and petrol, you probably may not notice there are two types of fuel prices there. But if I actually add a background color to it, you automatically think, okay, there is a similarity. There are two colors. Probably they're showing you different things. Still, it's a bad visual, but it actually makes a bit more sense to you. And what you're saying is, okay, there is two colors. So that's how you basically, you see the similarity between those columns, and you make it as a group in your brain, and you look at it as two, as similar things. So that's the principle of Gestalt, which is similarity. And the next thing I want to talk about, other one, is proximity. So just adding a bit of space between those gray dots, what we did, what we're looking at is, we're still looking at two groups. One group to the left and one group to the right, because we have that space in between. And within those groups, you probably look at two different colors, but what you see is two different things. And this is something we see pretty much every day. How many of you use bar charts? Pretty much everyone. So when you use bar charts, let me quickly exit, open the link. Sorry, let me mirror. So if you look at this visual, what we have is, we have ear. And because of the space between the bars, we are grouping them. So that is the proximity. We see proximity in every visuals and everyday report designing. But we don't actually always consider it. It's like, okay, there is a space in between those groups, so we're looking at each ear as one group. And because there is a space, you're looking at it differently. So there is, this proximity works with everyday report design when you're designing, for example, when you're designing dashboards, when you're designing reports, how we are spacing them makes a massive difference. That's what proximity is telling us. It's like when you're creating the data visualizations, when you're creating the dashboards, give that sensible space. That is what we learn from the proximity, and that's something we use in our everyday report design. And the next rule, which comes to is the enclosure. So what we have here is having a border around it. What it's giving us is it's giving that enclosure. It's grouping it. So we have border on these two lanes and on the rest one. So it's kind of giving that group. Again, this is something we see in our everyday reporting design, is because I have another example here. So if you look at this report, because I have this gray background around it, so you look at it as one group, and you look at the things on the right as another group. This is not a great report design, because what it has is the title, but it doesn't have all the labels or anything. So even though we don't have the labels or not a lot of narration to it, what you're looking at is, because of this, I'm not sure you can see the gray pane behind it, but having that little gray pane makes you feel like, okay, that's one group, and this is another group. So when you're creating the data visualizations and like a storytelling, when the grouping and the border makes a massive difference. So when you're designing something, design it in a way is like where you're adding the grouping and where you're adding the border. So that is something we learned from. Just a sec. That is something we learn from the proximity. The enclosure. And the next one is the revelation. So here, what we have is we have the proximity. We added a space in between. But if you change the border, now what you see, again we see two groups. Even though there is a space in between, because we added the border around it, you see them as two different groups, isn't it? Yes? Yeah? So this is a perspective, and which comes in very handy when we're designing the data visualizations, is like I have another example. So over here, what I have here is because what I have a group up there, I have a little background in the top one, and there is no background up here. So what you see is you obviously, when you're looking at it, you look at the top one and you make that as one group. And in the bottom one, you think it's something else. So again here, what you're showing is the proximity and also revelation. The space between and where you have the background, what you're highlighting is again something that we can learn from the Gestalt's principle. So that's what we learn from the revelation. Oops. Don't want the transition to happen. Sorry. It started way back there. And the revelation can happen with the size as well. So it's not only the group, but sometimes it's the size. For example, now you have the different size. So you look at all those different sizes as one size and the other ones as the other groups. So what the Gestalt's principles is all about grouping. And the grouping is what you do when you're looking at any data visualization, any UI design as well. The other important thing is the common fate. When we're working with the data, what we also look at is the fate of the data. So here, the same dots, one is moving one direction, the other is moving the other direction. So now what you look at is the direction, the fate, which direction they are going, that's how you group them. So for example, if you look at this visual, what can you see? Which two are going in the same direction? Exactly, and the red one. So immediately that's what you see. Those two are going in one direction, the other one is going in the other direction. So, but most of the times, we don't see the gray one or a blue one, the bottom one, it has a little bend, right? Most of the times, we don't pay attention that our system one doesn't look at it. System two looks at it, but when we're looking at it from our first impression, okay, those two going in one direction, the other two is going in the other direction. Again, when you're designing the data visualizations, this is important. If you want your user to look at that, highlight that, if you want your user to pay attention to that bend, then what you do is you actually add an annotation or highlight it doing something, add a comment or do something. So this is how you do the data visualizations, and this is how Gestalt's principles helps us, is how humans, how we look at the data visualizations, how we group things, how we look at patterns in our data and in the data visualizations. So the other thing is the focal point. So focal point is also important because in the previous one, when I said if you want your users to focus on that little bend, you highlight it. So that's when the conditional formatting, tooltips, the narration, and these text boxes in our labels in the Power BI perspective, those are basically very useful for the focal point. So for example, if you look at this one, and the focal point also happens with the size as well. You can highlight something with the size or with the color. But if you look at the example, whenever it comes up, yeah. If you look at this example, if you want your users to be focused on one thing, that is your focal point. You highlight it. You highlight the point so that your users pay attention to that one. And as a report designer, this is our responsibility because, again, that is something as human brains we look at it. So all these Gestalt's principles kind of helps us to see all these things. The next one and the last one that I want to cover from the Gestalt's principles is the figure and ground. So figure and ground is, most of the times, many people don't look at it as the data visualizations point of view, but figure and ground, the foreground and the background, are very, very important in the data visualizations world. So when you look at this, can you see any mistakes?
Dark background.
Exactly. So that's one thing I want to highlight, but there are many things that you can make mistakes with the foreground and the background. For example, for the same report, if I use like a yellow background, and you don't actually see the data very well. So if I actually use some good colors, now you can read because I used white color behind the dark background. So when you're creating the data visualizations, what colors you're choosing and what is the foreground and what is the background is very, very important. Sometimes when you have bar chart showing only 4 values, like 4 bars, and if you don't use the right colors, and as a human visual perception, if you don't use the right colors, right perception, like right space in between, sometimes as a human brains, we won't be able to understand, are you showing the vertical bar or horizontal bar? It's because the perception. Actually, I thought to add that example as like a visual makes more sense. But what it is like when you have 4 bars this way and 4 bars this way, you don't understand what you're showing. And so when you're designing the data visualizations, you would use the foreground and the background in that perspective and make sure your user can understand. So that's what we could learn from the Gestalt's principle. Is like the main thing about Gestalt's principles and the data visualizations is about understanding the human brain. How our mind works, yes?
I was just going to say one thing to keep in mind. I'm colorblind, so like on one screen where you're showing the ones go this way and this way, you're saying colors. I can't see colors.
Yes.
Very well. I see to a certain extent, but when you're talking about the different colors, I'm sitting there, I don't know which line she's talking about.
I know.
And you need to be aware of that in visualization.
Yes.
That last slide was nice because the contrast is enough that I can.
You can see it.
I can see basic greens, but green will turn to gray to me, and reds, I just have things change on me all the time.
Yes, that's very true. And being data visualizations, where I'm talking about this, I should be focusing on that. But again, because it's only the people who are actually going through understands it better. But we are talking about color blindness and and I will be showing some resources later today, and also James talking about it, about color blindness and how we need to consider all these things tomorrow. So yes, keep coming back to our sessions so you will learn. And you will be happy as well. So there you go. That's another very, very important thing to be considered when you're designing the data visualizations is the color. And actually today also I would be talking a bit more about color blindness and why it is important. So what it is that we learn from the Gestalt's principles and the understanding the science behind the data visualization is to create human-centric, the user-centric design. You create for users, so you consider all those things. And as a user, as a human, as we look patterns, we group things that we see. So that's why when you create the data visualization as well, create by thinking that when you present something, there will be all the grouping will be happening. So create it by using that one. So far what we saw is like the data visualization, the brain, the science behind it, and how we can use the Gestalt's principles and how we can use them when you are designing the data visualizations. So giving the nice space, using the right colors, and understanding how the humans looks at the grouping and how we find the patterns. So that's what we saw. But once you understand how humans works and how the brain works, the next thing is what visuals to choose. You understand there is a space we need to keep, there is that to keep, there's different colors, adding labels and all those things. But if you don't choose the right visual, then it's not great. Like if you're using a wrong visual, it's not great. So when it comes to the data visualizations, we have various types of data. So these are some data. These are probably most of the data that we come across every day. And you can use various visuals for each category of this data. So I'm not going to go through like every single visual and talk about you should do this one, you should do that one. But what I have is I have some really nice resources that you could use when it comes to the data visualization. These are like a really, really good. So let me click on one, and I'm going to talk about why I like this one. I will come back to the slide if anyone wants to. So anyone came across Data to Viz? Yeah? This is like a fantastic resource, and I always go back to this one. What I like about this is because having this, like at the top, you can go and choose what kind of data type you have. For example, I have numeric data type or categoric data type, and this this gives me that. Let me go back to the numeric data type. And what it gives me is, like, for example, if I click on the histogram, it gives me it tells me a bit about the data visualization, what data visual it is. But what I really, really like about this visualization is this resource is the common mistakes. So this tells you, again, this is where it's kind of related to Gestalt, is because the common mistakes you see here are very related to the Gestalts. It's like not only this visual, when you see some other visuals, for example, like a scatter plot. So overplotting, because when you overplot as a human brain, we can't see the pattern. Where can we group? So if we can't find grouping, if we see something and if we can't group it, we cannot make a decision. So always you create a visual to make the grouping. However you do the grouping, you make it. So when you're using the visualization based on your data, for example, if you look at the scatter plot, if you put too much plotting, you can't group it. So things like that, it's like this resource is really, really good to understand what visuals to choose and what mistakes you could make. The other resource that I would totally recommend is FT Visual Vocabulary. Anyone use Financial Times? Anyone read Financial Times? Well, it's a UK based. So Financial Times have this visual vocabulary. You can actually go to their website and you can print on this big A3 sheet. Again, what it is like a different type of data you have and what visuals to choose. This is not Power BI centric. It is like whatever the data visuals, whatever the tools you're using, this is quite helpful, even Excel and anything. So again, what it is like you can choose, for example, you can go and use for example, you have deviation data, there are various type of visuals to choose from, and you choose one of those things, and most of the times it works. I have another example that we'll be talking about. The next thing is because we are at Microsoft Focused Conference, and probably more people will be appreciating this, because this is a Power BI edition of Visual Vocabulary. Anyone saw this one? Oh, well, whenever it loads. So again, this is based on the visual vocabulary of Financial Times, but what it is showing is, this is showing the visuals within the Power BI. It's a great resource. For example, if I go back to deviation that we just saw in the other one, so this is showing the visuals within Power BI. Every single visual you see here is actually doable in Power BI. So if you are using Power BI, this is a great resource because you know that visual actually works in the Power BI. But what I have here is I have an example that I want to talk about, is the choosing the right visual. So why choosing the right visual is very, very important is whatever the resources I showed you so far, every single category of data has different types of visuals. Like every category has 3 or 4 types of visuals. And sometimes we struggle is like what visuals to choose in between 4, all those 4 visuals we just saw. So this is one of the examples. Is like, how many of you familiar with Brexit? Yeah, the never-ending saga. So this is a visual. This is where it started, the referendum results. So this is a visual. So because what we are saying is 2 comparisons, and using a bar chart is a great example. Isn't it? You can understand what's going on quite easily. And it's a great example using a bar chart. But it's not telling the story. It's not like my system one still needs to work a bit. It's because like a 2 bars, and I probably, how can we make it better? Maybe not pie chart, a donut chart. So what this gives me is like, okay, I can see the split. Again, this may not be the best visual, but many people likes donut chart. And yeah, there is a very, it's kind of if you say pie chart or donut chart, it's like a swear words in the data visualization world. But if you have only 2 categories of data, using a donut chart is not a crime. And there is many debates, and there is a really, really amazing article, like it's 4 or 5 pages article talking about why it's not a crime. But I still don't use it, because whenever you use it, they say it's like, oh, you're making a crime. But what I'm trying to talk about here is like, okay, this is another chart, again, 2 categories. So using the donut chart, if you fall for using donut chart is not a crime. This is a chart which is explaining, okay, the split. Okay, we can still understand there is what's going on there. But maybe instead of using here, the same chart, instead of showing the big number, maybe showing the percentage makes it a bit better. Even though it's the same chart, even though it's a crime to use that, but because we added labels and adding the percentage, it's an easy math. Instead of doing the math here, it's a bit easy, isn't it? Or maybe you want to use a different chart. Instead of using the pie chart, you may want to use something like this. So now the split is a bit more nicer. Like, you can easily understand, okay, this is 51-ish, and that is 48-ish. Okay, you can understand who's supporting what. Or maybe you could use something better. Like, you can use different colors. And you made it a bit wider and used a nice font. But what this gives is you're forcing remaining is bad and leaving is great because of the color. So it depends upon which side you're in. So is this a great chart? Well, it depends which side you're in. Or maybe the good chart would be this one, because you're using less space, showing the split, showing a different number. Instead of using the big actual words, you're actually showing it in percentage. So even then, maybe this may not be the right chart. This may not be the good chart. But what I'm trying to say is like whatever the categories, whatever the data types you have, you need to look at the data visual in a way is like how is it telling the story, yes?
What's your thoughts on infographics? That's a big no-no to some people.
Yes, infographic. I love infographics. I really like. I actually can show you some examples that I did on the infographics. And again, so I think we would be talking about that on the 3rd session, in the last session, where it is about the goal of your, who is your audience and what is the goal of your data visualization, your storytelling. And if your story is about talking about one single topic, then yeah, a scrollable report is an amazing example. And also, I know when we're in the Power BI world, we all like our clicks, bookmarks, and navigation, but not every user appreciates it. User doesn't want to click 3 times to get the result. So that's when infographic is amazing, because you can just scroll down. As humans, again, this is where Gestalt's principles also comes handy. It's like when Gestalt's principle inventor or discover, creator, this thing was not there, but now we could add another thing to Gestalt's principle is scrollable. We always scroll. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, emails, everything is we are used to that scrollable effect, and the infographic is basically scrollable. So yeah, it is about what visuals you use, what kind of data you have, and how you're presenting the data. If you have big number, you want to show the big number. Do you want to just show in the millions, or do you want to just show in the percentages? And so that's what you would be focusing on, is like how you're telling the story. You have a question?
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Uh-huh.
This doesn't mean a whole lot to me because I don't know what the numbers are. So it would be better if you put the 51% or 52%, you know, but in parentheses underneath it, put the sample size so that you have both in the same thing. I don't see what the problem with that was.
What the problem with this?
Because to say it's 52% or 48%, I don't know what the sample size is. I have no idea on this chart what's your sample size.
Yes. Well, people who are familiar, are you familiar with Brexit?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, so again, this is not a visual that I'm trying to say, okay, this is a great visual or anything. What it is trying to say here, in this perspective, is basically how same data set can be looked at differently. So if you are actually creating this visual to tell the whole story, then you probably won't tell the whole story just by using this one visual. What you would do is you probably create an infographic talking about, you begin with these many people voted, and these are the numbers, and this is the final, the split, and probably a bit of narration about what is the difference. Again, you don't want your users to do the math here. It's like, you know.
I'm saying you can have both on there. You can have the 51.89%, which is this many million people, you know, or 48, which is this many million.
Yes, yeah, you could have the both of them.
What I'm saying is you can put both of them.
Yeah, totally.
To me, that would make a lot more sense.
Yes, totally. Yeah, totally. So that's what I'm saying. This is not a great visual. It's because what is your user want and what is your goal? So, but the same data, you move from one visual to the other visual, and it's about what do you want? What is the number that you want to put there? For me, this is what makes sense, because I come from India. We have lakhs, crores, and I'm sure many of you may not even heard. And when I moved to UK, you have 100,000, 200,000. That's a different math to me. I never learned that in school. So if you put a percentage, it makes more sense to me. So these are the things, you create your designs, your data visualization, user-centric. Who is your user? What makes sense to your user? That is what you do. So that's what you learn from the Gestalt's principles. And also, when you're creating the data visuals, when you're choosing the visual, you choose the visual right. You choose what explains well. So these are the resources that I would totally recommend if you're using if you want to choose the right visual. And there are plenty more resources out there available. If you go and Google, there are so many visuals available. But these are my favorites when it comes to choosing the right visuals. And I sit down and do that one. And so once you understood how the human brain works, once you understood how the whole thingy and how we try to look at the groups, how we want to, whatever the size of the data, whatever the complexity of the data, how we're trying to group things together, the next thing that is very important is the visuals. Once we choose the right visuals and we know this is exactly right visuals, that's another thing comes really useful is the color theory. And color theory is whenever we're talking about data visualizations and the storytelling, we always talk about numbers with shapes. That's what we focus on. Most of the times, data visualizations is numbers and shapes. Many people forget there is color. And many people look at color is to add some prettiness. And that's when you kind of add a splash colors everywhere on the data visualizations to make it pretty, make it sleek, and things like that. But the colors is very important. And the other important thing is the shapes. It's what shapes, because that's how we group things. What shape it is in and what color it is in. we saw shapes in the data visualization. So shapes are pretty much covered with the data visuals. What visuals you choose is pretty much covered with the shapes. And we also looked at the patterns, like which way the patterns are going. Again, that is something covered by data visualizations. The visuals you choose is like if you choose the bar chart, if you choose the trend line, if you add a line to your bar, how the wave is happening, that's how you kind of look at the fate of the data and you make decisions. You group it based on that. But many times we forget color is key, color is important when it comes to the data visualizations. So this is when I want to talk about a bit about color theory and why color is important when it comes to the data visualization. So I have a few points that I want to highlight when it comes to the color theory. The first thing is choosing the color palette. From where do you get the color palette? So naturally, as humans, we like colors from the nature. So when we go, we tend to use, like when you step out, you see sky everywhere. And we are adopted to using the blue color. So if you look at all these big brands like Facebook, Twitter, many brands, they all use blue. It's because blue is a universal color. You feel comfortable with blue. You feel comfortable with green. You feel comfortable with gray. So these are like a universal colors. So I would always say, like, when you're using the colors, just use the colors from the nature. Like, just go and borrow it from the nature. And and also use the light colors for the background. It's like most of the times, they're like, of course, using the dark background makes it stand out, makes it look sleek, but actually using the light background makes it look minimal. It's not overcrowded. So use the light colors for the background, or use light colors on dark backgrounds. Don't forget this. It's like because many times we forget this. Is like you use the dark background and you use a different font, like a dark font on the dark background. It doesn't make sense. It's like many times your users doesn't read it. Another very good example for this one is the data bars. Many times people use data bars in a table, yeah? And when they create it, they forget at one point the data bar is wide or taking all the space in your column. But if you use like a dark gray for your data bar, by default your table color, like text in your table is black. At some point, a user can't see that number. What they see is only data bar. And when you're designing your report, you don't actually pay this attention. But like you need to something that you need to remember. Every single time you choose a dark color on your report, on your dashboard, think about the text what is the foreground? What is the text that you're going to use that on top of it? So think about that every time you choose it. And also the other thing that is like they say is you don't need any color on a report. Most of the times you can create something just by using white, black, and gray. Try to create something just using white, black, and gray, and then add color. So instead of just adding color, so if you want to tell a story, you should be able to tell a story just by using those three colors. But then if you add the color, that means you are actually using the color to highlight the point, not just to add it. So that is another thing like you could use when you're doing the color one. And also when you're in doubt, just use like blue or green and gray. These are the things that you can do when you're using the color. And also remember the culture, like because in some cultures red is bad, and in some cultures red is not bad. If you look at the referendum results I showed you before, it depends upon what you want your users to see. If you're showing red as like a leaf is red, then you are actually forcing your users to think it's bad. So always look at the culture and to whom you're designing the report. And also, like, for example, in the France, maybe if you use red, it may not be like, it depends where you're using, who is your audience. So you remember the culture, and also always, always, always remember the colored blindness people. So I would be showing some few examples a bit later about some resources which can be helpful when it comes to the color. So, but one thing I would say is when you're choosing the color, always borrow from the nature. Everything you see out there, it has a palette, and you can borrow a lot from the nature. So for example, if you look at this, it's a very nice, colorful report. But what you see is if I use this one, again, those two are I'm not saying it's a great example. First of all, I have a really bad background because I have this colorful background. And this is not a great color to convey the message. None of the palette matches. But even though, compared to the previous one, this one looks better. Agree? Yes. Even though it's not great, even though it has many mistakes in it, but it does look better compared to the previous one. So just don't use color just don't add too many colors. Use a nice, well-balanced scheme instead of adding whatever the color you want to add. Use a nice scheme, from darker to lighter. Use a balanced one. And when we are talking about the color scheme, this is something they use for the interior designing and UI, when you go to a website or things like that. This is something they use. And this is where I say just using the black, white, and gray makes you create something. But if you use the same rule when you're designing the data visuals as well, it works amazingly well. So you use 60% of the palette should be dedicated to one color. So for example, you have 7 categories you're showing on a visual. It's okay. If blue is your color, for example, use the different shades of the blue to highlight those 7 categories. You create the palette based on that. So use the 60% on one color. And next 30% to talk about probably legend and things like that. And the 10% is your highlighter. What you want your user to focus on, that is your 10%. So you use the 10% to highlight the specific points in your data. Anyone heard of Stephen Few? So Stephen Few is the guru of data visualization. He wrote many books, and his blog is amazing. But one thing he always says is highlight the specific point. Your visuals should be in a way to tell the story. I say, you don't need a text to explain a visual next to. Many people put the text next to the visuals. Even I said that before. It's if that is where you want your users to point, if you want your users to address in that little bend we saw in the common fate one, and I said, okay, put a label next to it saying focus on that one. But if you create a good visualization, you don't need an explanation. The visual should tell it itself. That's when it's a good visual. So if you use the 10%, if you use the right color to tell the story, that 10% does the justice to that visual, that entire report is your user know that is what they need to focus on. So use this rule whenever you're creating any data visualizations. And this is what I was saying, the blue and green. For example, if you look at the Facebook, we are familiar to Facebook, that is another thing, but using the blue colors makes it very convenient, and that is why all these brands have been using blue, is because it's the universal color. And the other thing I would say is never use color to convey the message. So this is where I talk about color blindness, is so for example here, what I have is green and red. So I'm using the red color to highlight the color, saying, okay, you need to enter something, okay? But you need to think about people who can't see the red. Maybe you want to add another different label. So if you have to use red on your report, okay, use red, but maybe add a text saying this is where it is wrong. So for example, if you look at this, what we are saying, we are highlighting it with color, but we are also highlighting with the text underneath. So people who cannot see, they see on the left side, you can see how the color blindness people would see it, like, so they actually see the text. So that is something always you remember when you're designing the things. And the other thing to remember when it comes to the data visualizations and the colors is use single colors to represent the same type of data. And this is a mistake like many people, and even I do it, if I don't pay much attention. It's always easy to say than done. It's like if you'd see my work, maybe you won't appreciate like why did you present that way. But yeah, I do this many times. It's like use the same color to represent the same data. So if you look at here, we have February, and we are using blue to February and maroon to May. That's one visual, that's second visual, and then in the bottom visual, by the time you come to the bottom visual, you forget the labels. What you remember is, okay, blue is February and May is maroon. And in the bottom visual, what I am using is I'm also not focusing on my font color. So my user don't actually see the font very well. So what my user thinks, okay, that blue is, okay, the maroon is, we know maroon is February from the top visual, and the blue is May, sorry, blue is the February in the other way. So if you don't use the same color, if you don't use the consistency, you are kind of misleading your users. So always maintain the consistency between the different visuals, especially if you have the visuals over different pages. Yeah, and if you're telling one thing in one page with the one color, and you go to the next page and you show it with the different colors, if you change the colors, that is very misleading, and that's basically you're fooling your users. So that is something to remember. It's like use the same color. And watch out for positive and negative numbers. It's like for example, I have this here, number, this visual that we always use, but what we have here is I have the positive and the negative number. So always maybe highlight it. You don't have to use the background color to highlight it, maybe just use a different font color, and watch out what you're highlighting. Again, if you're highlighting positive instead of negative, or if you're highlighting negative instead of positive, what is that your user want? And what is that you're highlighting is important. So think about when you're designing something, positive and negative. And we have those numbers all the time, most of the times when you're working with numbers. So just remember them and how you can represent that data better. So that's something is quite important. And check contrast. When you're designing the visuals, always remember the contrast. What is the contrast you're using? So this is the same example we saw before. And, but now, because I have the better font color, it makes a bit more sense. Of course, it's still misleading because we are not consistent with colors, but at least me focusing on the contrast, if we focus on your visuals a tiny bit more, then you still understand, okay, that is February, this is May, even though if I'm using the colors wrong. So remember the contrast is like what contrast you're using, what is the foreground and what is the background. And the next thing is make gray is your best friend. How many of you create reports using gray? Exactly. Gray is like a very, it's like whenever you're designing the data visuals, and gray is the thing which adds that minimalism. And also the proximity is where it comes. It's like the space. Gray kind of makes you feel like you have that everything looks nice and tidy. That is what gray does. And this is a great example I like. Instead of showing a visual, like a dashboard or something, I thought this is a very good way to explain how gray is. It's like it kind of makes everything disappear, adding gray. And especially when you're creating infographic and things like that, if you use gray, it makes it look really nice. For example, if you look at here, so it's like pretty much, you see there is a lot of gray. And there is a very little highlighting color, which is green. So if you look at that, the 70-30-10 rule that we saw before, 60-30-10 rule, is like, again, this is a very good example for that. It's like they are using one color to highlight. And they also maintaining the consistency, like, the big numbers using that big font and bold. And so you're making you're doing many things here. The proximity, if you go back to the Gestalt's principles here, the proximity between each group, and also the size. So because most of the labels, the big numbers are BAS, it's big, I should probably not say it, numbers, is like a key metrics are in one bold color and a big font. But like if you come all the way down, the sizes got bigger. So that is, again, this is where we talk about Gestalt's principles, is like because you immediately group all the numbers, all those bold numbers as one category, and the bottom one as a different category. You immediately know that is a different number that you should be focusing on. Yes?
So when I look at this, I as a U.S. viewer, if you will, and who reads left to right, top to bottom, I would want to put the bigger number, the bigger information, right up there on the left-hand side, and position it. Now, if I was an international person who, I don't know, I personally don't know where I would put it if I wanted to have a more international flavor to my screen, if I were looking at Chinese or Japanese or Indian, where I would position my thing so that it would speak to that audience.
Yes, yes. Well, so this is where we would be talking a bit more about that in our last session, where it is like your goal audience is like, again, what is your goal? It's like if your goal is your international audience, who would probably like a Chinese, who would be probably reading from a different direction. But like if that is what you're creating it for, then probably you design it that way. But like as a visualizations experts, what they say is you always put your key metrics at the top and at the top right, because as humans, because that's how we start reading, you want to see your key metrics there, and then a bit other metrics and the other metrics. But like, this is something I could be totally wrong, and I'm not an amazingly data visual expert, but having different size, having different font, and your pattern, the grouping, you kind of don't miss it. Like for example, if you look at this one, and if you look at this as your first view, yeah, you see various things, but you kind of don't miss that big number, irrespective of where it is, because the size. So like I don't want to argue or a debate about it, like where you put your key metrics, but in my opinion, it's the size and also the color, which highlights the data. But if you are somebody, you're creating data visuals for everyday use, like if you're creating a dashboard for everyday use, then it makes sense. You want your key metrics, and you want your details, and probably more detail. So if you're creating a dashboard, you create key metrics in the front page, and then you go from one page to the other page. So I will we could talk more about it a bit later. So the other thing is to use the color to highlight the most important information. So always use color to highlight. Just don't use color to add the prettiness. Use color to highlight. Also for the prettiness, because that's what I do, but I always use the color to the highlight as well. And there are some tools that I would recommend if you're into color. Is like so I want hue is my favorite go-to tool when it comes to the color. So it's like because this why I like is like I could just go here and I can say make a palette, and it creates me a palette for me. And what also this gives me is like how that color looks with the different foreground and background. So because this is the color palette I want to use in my report, then here this gives me, like for example, if I go for this foreground and that background, it's not going to work for me. So this is why I really like it, and these emojis are really nice. It's like, you don't have to, again, how our perspective is like you will see a happy emoji and it's happy, like I could use this color. So this is a very good one, and it also talks about color blindness and other things as well, this one. So this is where I think it's good to jump into Power BI themes for the people who are using Power BI. My next slide would be the color palettes. So I use the color, you could get the color palette from different places. We will be talking about color more tomorrow. But what we would be talking about is once you have your color palette ready, what you could do is you could use Power BI themes. So people who are using Power BI, how many of you use Power BI themes? Okay. So if you are not, but the people who are already using, well done. But if you are not using Power BI themes, I would say totally go and use it. It is a lifesaver. It will let you control the look and feel of your Power BI files. So we will be talking more about Power BI themes in the next session, but I want to talk about a few good resources when it comes to the Power BI themes. It's like, how many of you heard of this amazing Power BI tips? Yeah? Yes. So if you're using Power BI, this is another go-to resource to go for. So if we go back to my previous one, so what I have here is I have this JSON numbers of my Power BI file. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to go back here and go to theme generator, report theme generator. Well, actually, I will just go to the basic one. There is advanced versions, but I'm a very basic person, so I'll go to basic theme generator. And let me clear everything. I paste all my stuff here and add. So what it's creating is it created a palette for me and PBI file, and I click the download. What it creates is it creates a Power BI theme file for me. And once I have my Power BI theme file, what I can do is I can just go to my parallel desk, my Power BI. It was on, but now it's suspended. But what I can do is I can use that Power BI theme in my Power BI desktop. So what it gives me is I don't have to go and change the colors of my visuals every single time. What I could do is I could just use the theme file. Let it resume, and then I would quickly show what it can do. So for example, we have this one here. And there are a few things I can do. Is like I could go to home, and I could go to here. There are various themes available. For example, I could just go and I could change the themes. That's something we can do because there are various themes available in Power BI. But what I want to do is I want to import the theme I just got. So I go back to downloads. So there you go. And what this gives me is if I click on that, go to the visual, go here and click on the data colors. What this gives me, it gives me the colors I've chosen from the palette, from my palette. So I created a palette, I got all my colors, I created the Power BI theme file, I uploaded that into my Power BI desktop. What it gives me is like all the colors that we could use. So that's the Power BI theme file does, and the Power BI theme file is like it's amazing when you're creating your data visualizations because you don't have to struggle. Can I take the questions later because we have only a few minutes left? So it's like when I said the user-centric design, and I started my session saying bad design speaks out loud than the good design. But yes, good design also speaks out loud. So this is something like, I presented another session at Copenhagen or in Netherlands. And sometimes good designs gets attention. And whatever the data you're showing, good designs gets attention and it makes people happy. So I want to end this session saying one thing is create something that actually worth consuming. If you don't design, if you don't create a report that makes people happy about it, you want to design something that they can find their answers. And most of the times, it's not only finding the answers. Your data design, when you're creating the data visualizations, it's also be able to find questions. If you're creating something for analysis purpose, you want to help them find the patterns. You want to help them find the groups in your data. So when you're creating the data visualizations, remember these things is like how humans looks at the data, how humans looks at the data visuals, and how we are trying to group everything. When you give a blank canvas, what do you want to put on it, and how your user will look at it. Another thing to remember, what is your goal, who is your audience, and what are you designing? If you design something, if you design as I said before, if you design a report which takes like 4 clicks to get into key metric, and if you designed that one for your CEO, next day you won't have your job. Because I don't have time to click 4 times. We all, I know many people loving bookmarks. I love bookmarks. But if you're creating a report for your CEO, you don't want to put 100 bookmarks on your front page. What he want or she want is a key metric. Just put it there. So remember the goal. Create user-centric designs. Designs, reports, visualizations, whatever you call it, but create it for your user. And once you created them, and it's amazing, it's happy, everyone is happy. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, I will be hanging around here. Feel free to come and talk to me. And thank you so much. And do come back for our learning path, because we will be covering many other things. And in the last session, we would be talking about user stories as well.